Okay, so moving forward with case studies in water governance, we looked at situations of water scarcity, water abundance, and how the institutions and the adaptation, multi-level structures of institutions, action arenas, action situations, relative positions, etc., play out, including the attributes of the community or people involved. Now we'll look at a case of distribution of water as an example using irrigation. They are not all independent, but when you say irrigation, infrastructure comes to mind in terms of bringing in the water and then spreading it for feeding the crops. You hear about drip irrigation as a way to save water, or sprinklers which are very inefficient, and so on. But this is a very nice example of a region that does have a lot of water usually, except during El Niño. So it's Bali, which is in Indonesia. Irrigation requires coordination and cooperation. One has to build infrastructure in order to move the water around. This infrastructure needs to be maintained in order to function properly. By maintenance, we mean cleaning of the canals and repairing damage to levees and diversion structures. Once the infrastructure is in place, water needs to be shared, so you need some priori institutional structure for that as well, and water governance. In most cases, farmers who have their plots of land near the source of the water have preferential access to the water, and this plays out in many places. In order for downstream farmers to get the water they need, the upstream farmers need to restrict their use of water, so there have to be regulations and enforcement. But given our earlier discussion of social dilemmas, why would the upstream people restrict their use to worry about downstream users? What are the motivations? What are the rules and norms? The earliest records of irrigation that have been found to date the earliest records of irrigation that have been found date to about 8,000 years ago in the Middle East. So that's contemporary Iraq and Iran, which used River Tigris as it stands now. And independent development of irrigation systems are found all over the rest of the world as agriculture spread across, especially rice paddies and so on. There is a wide variety of ways in which infrastructure is built, ranging from mud-based canals and simple wooden diversion structures to concrete canals and computer-operated diversion gates. The year 2023 summer saw a Mediterranean cyclone that crashed into Libya and broke a dam and led to thousands of deaths, and that dam was actually built with mud and bricks, and the rain rates were massive. I think a year's worth of rain fell in about 6 hours. So whether there was a blame game following the flood, and maintenance was blamed, governance was blamed, but given the structure with mud and bricks, could it have withstood the deluge caused by 6 hours of rain worth a year's total? Would the dams have been able to stop the floods anyways? So these are kind of the situations that play out. Subak irrigation is the example, and this is a very nice example. You can see these terraced structures. Bali is one of the islands of Indonesia that has had a complex and very productive irrigation society for about 1,000 years, and along the way it's had visits by the Hindu kingdoms, which have left behind Hindu cultures there, and then it colonized by the Dutch, Indonesia did, and so on. Hundreds of irrigation communities called subaks, I don't know exactly how it's pronounced, are connected via waterways that begin at a lake near the top of an old volcano, which is shown here. So then you have gravity flow possible. Canals connect these water to subaks downstream. This complex irrigation system has been studied in detail by anthropologist Stephen Lansing, who I think is at the Nanyang Technology Institute in Singapore now, if I'm not mistaken, and has been made famous in a book titled Priests and Programmers. The irrigators have to solve a complex coordination problem involving water distribution and pest control, which comes to flood irrigation of rice, so weeds, for example. They didn't have pesticides 1,000 years ago either, so they had to do it using water as a way to protect the roots and the seedlings as they reached old enough age to survive. On the one hand, control of pests is most effective when all rice fields in a particular sub-region are on the same schedule for planting rice, so that you don't have pests moving from place to place like the locusts do, for example. This is due to the fact that the pests, insects called plant hoppers, are limited in their ability to move or disperse on the landscape. If large enough areas are kept fallow, areas without plants between planted areas, the plant hoppers can't cross them because there isn't any food to keep them alive while they cross, i.e. the fallow areas are food deserts for these plant hoppers. This keeps pest outbreaks localized if they occur at all. On the other hand, the terraces shown here, sorry, I screwed that up. On the other hand, the terraces are hydrologically interdependent. The long and fragile ecosystem of weirs, tunnels, canals, and aqueducts used to control where the water goes, making it challenging to get the water to all the fields while maintaining large enough fallow areas between planted areas, all in a limited growing season. So you can see the number of parameters you are dealing with: multi-users, multiple levels, geographically or orographically, and pest control, and fallow food deserts needed in between to control the pests, and getting water to all the fields that are trying to grow rice in the limited growing period. Okay, so you go on the internet. I took some from this and other sites. This is the paper, I think, based on Steve Lansing's work in a journal called Horizon of Reason. Shows the Dutch canal that was built during the Dutch colonization, which shows more of a cemented structure as opposed to natural structures used by the older Subuks. This is a combination of a field and a water temple that is used in this way here. So you can see how the water is worshipped and how people treat water as a gift from God that has to be protected and kept clean, and so on. So this kind of natural respect for resources obviously is common in the Eastern cultures and is meant to promote sustainability and lack of sense in polluting and overusing resources, sharing them, etc. Right? To balance the need for coordinated fallow periods and the use of water, a complex calendar system has been developed that determines what actions should be carried out on each specific date. These actions are related to the spiritual practice of making offerings to water temples at several levels that we just looked at. Little temples at the rice terrace level, so that's this is a little temple here. At the water. Where am I? Okay, I have to go back. So these actions are related to the spiritual practice of making offerings to water temples at several levels. Little temples at the rice terrace level, the temple at the village level, and the temple at the regional level associated with the Pura Ulun Swi, the head of the rice terraces. This is a temple of the highest priest Jero Guri, the human representative of the goddess of the temples in the crater lake extinct volcano, the main source of water for irrigation for this whole region. These offerings of water and other items were collected as a counter performance for the use of water that belonged to the gods. So there's mythologies of a king that was not doing his role in offering the penance for using the water, so he had a battle with Indra. The name is slightly changed in Indonesia, but Indra in Hindu culture is the god of rain, for example. So entire mythology is built into these water conservation, natural use of resources, and sharing and governance. These ritual practices trigger the calendar actions, i.e. people make offerings at particular times, after which they can plant, etc. It gives you a sense of respect for the resources they are relying on. During the 1980s an increasing number of farmers wanted to switch back to their old ritual-based system, but the engineers interpreted this as religious conservatism and resistance to change. How indigenous knowledge is practiced has to be understood before just discarding them as voodoo or religious conservatism and resistance to change. Steve Lansing quotes a frustrated American irrigation engineer: "These people don't need a high priest, they need a hydrologist." So anthropologists think in a different way. They go and try to understand the culture, the context for which these rituals exist, and so on. It was Lansing who unraveled the function of the water temples and was able to convince the financiers of the Green Revolution project on Bali that irrigation and rice cultivation was best coordinated at the level of the water temples. Lansing built a computer model of the artificial ecosystem and showed that for different levels of coordination, from farmer level up to the central control at the top of the lake, the temple level was where decisions could be made to maximize the production of rice. So participation, community resilience, and community stakeholder efforts to bring about sustainability and sharing was naturally built into these temples and their scales. So very intelligent implementation of water sharing. As this story suggests, the complex irrigation system on Bali and the role of temples in operating it has evolved over a long history of local adaptations at different levels of organization and different spatial scales. The water temples played a significant role in the coordination of the use of water, but also in providing technical advice and mediating water use conflicts between different subaks. That's always part of the arrangement, that conflicts are dealt with. Remember the cow jails in the adaptation course, that's the same thing. By making offerings to different temples, the farmers were made aware of the interconnections between the water flows at different scales. Due to Lansing's insights and analysis, some of these systems have evolved still further and avoided the fate of many self-organized systems of this kind when experts declared them defunct and constructed new infrastructure like the Dutch Canal without paying much attention to local property rights, ecology, culture, and traditions. How to mix social science, anthropology with natural resource management is very tricky, but still very essential and important, because climate change sounds like a physics, chemistry, math, biology problem, but ultimately it's a social science problem when it comes to dealing with the impacts and implementing solutions, especially adaptation interventions. Okay, so this nice story should conclude this podcast. Then we'll come and look at the other part of the water governance, which is water pollution. Okay, let's leave this here.